Hello and welcome to another edition of The Tigers Down Under. I'm your host, as always, Alex, and with me tonight I have Logan.
Good evening, Alex, and everybody.
1 point better off, one position higher on the table as we edged up one position with a pretty underwhelming draw against Reading. What did you think of the game, Logan? It was a bit underwhelming, I suppose, 0-0, but a point's a point.
Yeah, certainly. I think the key word underwhelming probably sums it up. But I don't think the match was without its moments, and I certainly, whilst there's contradictory reports coming out of Hull itself, I think that we're probably are starting to show glimpses of improvement, particularly defensively. It's kind of that catch-22 where we're scoring goals under Slatsky and losing, and now under Atkins we're struggling to find the back of the net, but at the same time we aren't conceding them. So we've kind of lost our strength and have kind of fixed our other problem in defence. So yeah, look, it was an interesting game, and I think that probably summed up by that one moment where Terrell's goal was disallowed, which probably would have provided probably the only real highlight of the match.
And what was your take on that? It's a bit of a controversial one that I've seen people talking about a little bit. It's one of those hard situations where you feel like the ref's generally going to favour and protect the goalkeeper. Seems to kick the ball out of his hand. An argument can be made he didn't have control of it. It's always a tough one to adjudicate, but what was your take on it?
Yeah, as I watched it in live motion, I erred on the side of it probably was a goal. As I saw the replay, I was pretty content that the referee got it right. Monona had enough control and certainly did have his hand down, pressing the ball against the ground, and Terrell did kick it out of there. So I know that goalkeepers are a reasonably protected species, and there's a lot of complaints made about that nowadays anyway. But I think that I'm pretty happy for the referee's decision to stand on that. Obviously, I would have preferred it to be a goal, but I think he probably got it right.
And speaking of Terrell there, he really seemed to be our most dangerous player for large chunks of the game. He was sort of creating a lot of chances, lacking a bit of conviction sometimes in his final product, but really sort of opening the game up for us when he could.
Yeah, certainly. I think he does grow into that role of offering us the hope of creativity or the spark. When you look at who's sharing the midfield roles with him, and certainly along the David Myler, Jackson Irvine positions, they're more just grafters, and they've been, particularly Jackson has been incredibly impressive in that role. But yeah, certainly when you're looking for that creativity or that flair, Terrell is offering it certainly more so than he was initially, and than what we're getting from other players, with the exception of probably Jared Bowen.
Were there any other players that stood out for you from this game that deserved praise? I think McGregor had another good game in goal. Not that he was challenged on too many occasions, but anyone else that really came to your attention?
I already touched on it. I thought Jackson Irvine had a exceptional game until he went off. Whether he was injured or if he was just a tactical substitution, I really was impressed with his work rate. As per usual, he's really grown into that role of chasing everything, and I think he has kind of made that position his own now. I've really enjoyed watching him play, and I think that he was probably a standout. If I was to offer any more suggestions, I think Kamore and Ole Aina probably had two of their better games, in the sense that they weren't giving away as much easy ball. It's probably been the criticism that I've had of both of them over the last few games, is their ability or inability rather to find feet with their passes. But they looked a lot more consolidated in this game against Reading.
So it's a point gained. Good to get on the board again in terms of getting points. As you say, frustrating that it seems as if we've sort of solved our issues in conceding goals, but also lost our ability to score goals. Always seems to be the sort of thing where you can't really manage one without the other unless you're a really top level team, which we seem to not be at the moment. But we'll move on to Sunderland on the weekend, who we'll talk about in a second. But we've also got some transfer news over the weekend. Interesting developments with two bids for McKenna from Aberdeen, centre back Young. 18 appearances for them in the league, and they're sitting second in the table, so he's obviously doing something right. Sounds as if we offered 300,000 initially, perhaps, largely back-ended, only a small sum up front. That was rejected out of hand. We've then gone back with a restructured offer, but for the same amount of money, so perhaps more of it up front. I'm not sure. And that was also rejected. There's a lot of noise coming from them that he's not for sale. Always hard to tell how much of that is just sort of grandstanding and really wanting to push up the price, which it sounds like we're willing to do with a third offer. Um, Logan, do you think he's the sort of player that we need at the moment? Obviously, we're looking for a centre back to really sort of shore up that defence, but is a relatively untried youngster really the way to go, or should we be looking for more of a mature body?
In many ways, I think the offer is somewhat insulting, probably because of the fact that we haven't really, considering the outlay and the amount of money that we recouped in going down last year, to be offering bids to players to fix our defensive problems that kind of were present, certainly under Slutsky, and willing to outlay 300,000. It's just embarrassing when I really think about it. And I think it's probably alludes to the fact that the club must be close to a sale, because if there was any doubt, the Allams have well and truly packed up shop as far as willing to fork out any kind of money
Yeah.
for these purchases. I think that he's certainly an attainable target, and I think that if we've only produced a bid of 300,000, certainly we know, City fans, we've got room to move in that regard for the cap, and I think we probably will go back for a third bid. Whether he's the answer to our defensive woes, I would be incredibly uncertain if we were putting our hopes in a Scottish Scottish league player for that kind of money to fix what has been up until the last few weeks a very large concern for us.
Well, I think I saw Swanee writing an article in the Hull Daily Mail for another Merc player potentially being the answer to our questions. The captain from the team that we played on the weekend in Paul McShane, potentially looking at someone that we should try and get back to the KCOM. How would you feel? Obviously, I think there's a lot of optimism, well, positive feelings towards him from the supporters, and he'd be welcomed back. What do you think he's the sort of player, or is he the player that we would need to look at to get back?
Well, I think that when he went down and the crowd gave us relive the moments of "Don't Tell Mick Shane," I thought that was fantastic, and that really kind of showed, if there was ever a doubt, the affinity that still exists among the City faithful and Super Macca. Uh, I think he's a fantastic player, and I do think that, given the fact that he's captaining the Reading side, he's obviously held in high esteem there as well because of the way he goes about his business. He would certainly be welcomed back at City with open arms, and I think he'd do a fantastic job for us. One thing that you will never doubt with Paul McShane is his 100% commitment to everything that he does. And whilst he is getting on in age, if you were to invite him into a relegation scrap and a club that he clearly cares about, I think he'd do a fantastic job for us. And I know it'd certainly be one that the fans would be incredibly endeared by.
And then on the injury front, in more positive news, Abel Hernandez due back hopefully next month. He's aiming for a return to the team. To get him back in February, I think is a bit earlier than we were expecting. I think initially people were thinking he'd be out till late March. Obviously, even if he is back fit in February, he'll still take a couple of games, couple of weeks to get up to match fitness and get his sharpness back. But that'd be a huge boost to the team.
Abel Hernandez coming back into the squad, given our frailties in front of goal at the moment, would certainly be a huge boost. Whether he's ready to come back into the fold just yet, I'm not so sure. Given the fact that we know he's injury prone and has had a history of picking up these niggles and some reasonably long spells on the sideline, it would be a huge hazard to certainly miss him for the last kind of 2 months of the season. But with the World Cup coming up, you know that he's certainly very keen to get out there. And Abel Hernandez wanting to be on the field, scoring goals for us can only be a good thing, particularly at the crisis moment we find ourselves in now.
It'll be certainly interesting as well if he can get himself fit and playing again. From his point of view, that would also be good because I suspect he'll be looking for a move away in the summer. But if he does struggle for game time or has a reoccurrence of his injury or anything like that, it does beg the question of whether he would look to sign at least a 1 or 2 year extension to really sort of ground himself and get back to fitness and sharpness and attract a potential suitor either from the championship or from overseas.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think that the beautiful thing about the situation we find ourselves in, particularly as City fans in a relegation scrap wanting to stay up, and Abel Hernandez, whether he's wanting to promote himself for the World Cup spot, we both have the same goal in the sense that
Yeah.
he wants to score goals and we need them to keep us up. So it does seem to marry up quite well. And yeah, I do think that if the end of the season did roll around, he would certainly be one of the assets that other clubs would see as a very good answer to a lot of their striking options, and he'd probably be a pretty good steward to move on. He'd be hot property in some respects.
And off goes Myler, and he beats Catamol, his former teammate, to it. David Myler against his old club. It's 2. Myler leads the celebrations, including a reference to the headbutt by Alan Pardew on this ground last weekend.
Well, we've just heard there a pretty famous goal scored by David Myler in the FA Cup quarter-final, if you would call it that, against Sunderland, that booked our place to Wembley a couple of years ago now. And we've had a couple of memorable clashes with Sunderland over the years. It felt like under Steve Bruce, we basically couldn't lose against them, basically winning all of the games that he faced them in at least that first season. And I think also that second season as well, if I'm not mistaken. But it turned a bit sour last season under Marco Silva and also Mike Phelan. I think we lost both of the games, unfortunately, under the pair. And now we find ourselves both in the championship. So, Logan, our upcoming opponent this weekend is a pretty familiar one in a lot of ways. Shared managers, shared players, all sorts of things. What are your thoughts on Sunderland and your memories of playing them in recent years?
Well, for all the heartache that we've experienced over the last, particularly 12 months as City fans, but obviously going back longer, um, if there's another club that you would like to distance yourself from, Sunderland is probably the club that have been on the steady spiral, even more so than us. The situation they find themselves in is really horrific, and it's actually quite sad when you consider the size of the club, and kind of what they represent for the northeast. To be in the situation they're at is is somewhat of a catastrophe. I saw that they released Jack Rodwell, and
Oh,
some
that
of the
deal was
comments
just
were,
ridiculous, though, wasn't it?
well, it was a hideous deal, but
Yeah,
the comments that came out about it, the worst decision they've ever made, um, tells you a lot about where they find themselves. Look,
Bullard-esque as well,
as
actually.
it's
Thinking about it.
extremely,
Yeah.
when you think about the comparisons, it's exactly right. And that was the thing that kind of sprung to mind for me as well. Um, but I think about what's happening there, and how much trouble they're in. They're still the team that, we saw what they did. They probably were responsible for our relegation, given the kind of coming to life of us last season until they obviously put us out of our misery. I think that this game's a dangerous one. I know that they're down and out, and I know that they've got a lot of troubles. And when you look at their position on the ladder, as you said 12 months ago, you probably couldn't write a story that had a worse lineup than this matchup, given how sad it's been from both camps. But I'm very wary of them, and I think that on the day that we're very fragile and could easily go there and find ourselves on the receiving end of a loss, which at this at this time of the season, and given where we're at, would just be horrible and really put us in a world of hurt.
Well, I think, yeah, absolutely. I think whichever team loses this game faces the very real possibility. In Sunderland's case, it would be a certainty. But if it was us to lose the game, a very real possibility that we'd be bottom at the end of the weekend. So it's a pretty terrifying fixture in that sense, and there'll be a lot of nerves from both teams, I would suspect. Because from a Sunderland point of view, it would represent a very good chance of picking up the 3 points and really sort of starting some sort of revival. I mean, they've got Chris Coleman in, so he's a decent enough manager, and he just seems to have had no impact there, which is much the same story of all of the managers that they've had in recent years. And as you said, it's a remarkable story, and as a neutral, you kind of look at them and you think, oh well, they offered nothing to the Premier League. You're happy for them to go down, possibly. But then, from a sympathetic point of view, you look at them and you say, okay, they're a big club. They've got a 60,000 odd stadium, 50,000 odd stadium, so similar in stature to Newcastle in that sense. Reasonably successful club in the past. Um, Apart from the fact that they've churned through managers in recent seasons and really settled for quite a mediocre target in the Premier League, there's not a whole lot to actively dislike about them, really, other than, the stereotypes about location or whatever you want to talk about. But I remember when we first got relegated back in 09-10, Bruce was at Sunderland. They were looking quite an attractive team to watch, and I found myself following some of their games in their Premier League seasons when they had not Ryan Sessegnon, Stefan Sessegnon. Elmo, of course, was there. Myler was there. Gian up front. All those sorts of guys. They were quite an entertaining team to watch, and it's almost as if ever since they sacked Bruce, it's all just collapsed for them. And I know Rick Skelton on Twitter a few weeks ago was asking the question of if there's ever been an occasion before where two teams have faced each other in three different divisions in successive seasons. And I think the answer came back that it might have happened only once before, which was with Cardiff and Wolves in divisions 2, 3, and 4 in 84, 85, 85, 86, and 86, 87. So a very similar sort of collapse as us. So obviously it's never happened the other way around. But it would be a remarkable sort of story because you get some clubs going through a double relegation like a Wolves, or I think there was another club that also did it recently. I forget who it was. But having two clubs do it at the same time, it would be quite a remarkable sort of situation, especially as I touched on at the start. There's such a shared history between the clubs in recent years, at least. Obviously, with Bruce as manager at both clubs, Elmo and Myler, a few other sort of connections as well. It's quite a remarkable sort of situation, and a very sad one for both clubs, really. There's so much off-field issues with both clubs as well that it's just a remarkable sort of situation. And just going back to the game itself, it's a huge opportunity for us and also for them to pick up three much-needed points. To underline how dank and hopeless their situation at the moment is, they've had one win at home in the last 13 odd months. So it's a very bizarre sort of situation where playing them away is almost there's almost more hope of getting a win than there would be if you were playing them at your own home ground.
Right. If there was ever such thing as a 12-pointer, I think that this week is
Yeah.
certainly, and like I said, the parallels between those declining clubs, the Blackpools, the Boltons, although and Blackburn as well. And I know they've kind of resurrected themselves a little bit, the latter two, but it really does kind of send that striking fear that City really are in a relegation fight now, and if they were to find themselves getting relegated this time round, the gap between the League One and the top of English football becomes a monumental hill to climb. So, as you said, this game this week against Sunderland is going to be a ginormous one.
Absolutely, and you see some of the more pessimistic City fans, if that's even not an oxymoronic sort of sorry, I should say tautological sort of phrase. Pretty much would sum up the entire supporter base at the moment. But pessimistic City supporters retweeting tweets from last year where we'd said, oh well, at least we'll win a couple of games in the Championship, and now retweeting it and saying, oh well, at least we'll win a couple of games in League One. But it is that sort of situation. You think you can't just assume if you get relegated that you can bounce straight back up. So it's a very dangerous situation that we find ourselves in, and probably underlines why it's so ridiculous that we haven't bought in any new players so far in the window. It's halfway through. It's almost as if the owners don't recognise quite how dangerous the situation that we find ourselves in. Sunderland, at least, I think, have brought in a defender from Chelsea on loan. I saw the amusing comment from Coleman talking about, if you play for Chelsea, you must be a pretty good defender, and the response being, well, obviously you haven't seen the Chelsea defenders on loan at City, but they're at least trying to make a few moves in the market, and hopefully we can pull our finger out and start making a few moves of our own soon.
Well, you would hope so. And from another standpoint is you've got to think that the cost to the Allens themselves, if they are looking to sell the club, unless they know something we don't know, the cost of a football club once it reaches League One would surely be even more diminished than what the current price tag already is.
Absolutely.
So with that in mind, is to hope that something will happen in the market and that we will go out and strengthen in those positions that are of great need.
So then just rounding things off, talking a bit more about the game itself, I suppose. Any changes that you would make to the lineup from the side that ran out against Reading? Campbell perhaps starting up top if he's fully fit, or are you happy to see Dicko go it alone?
I've been really impressed with Dicko. I know that he hasn't had the goal return, but I was actually saying to my brother as we watched the Reading game that, in all honesty, that I can't remember a striker that's gone up and played that top striker by themselves role better than what Dicko does. He works his socks off and he makes a really valid effort to hold the ball up. So I'm never too uninspired when I see Dicko as leading the line by himself. But with that being said, I know that we all are aware of Fraser Campbell's goal scoring ability, not always for positive reasons.
Well, he likes scoring against a former club, so might be the game to roll him out in.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I would like to see Fraser Campbell, knowing that Sunderland are in such a predicament. It would be an awesome opportunity to go there and play two strikers and really throw the kitchen sink at them, so to speak. The other change, or the question of change that we're kind of unaware of, would be the situation with Grzycki, whether he's back into the fold, and in which case, if he is, then he certainly comes straight back in because we don't have a larger threat than himself. And also, yeah, that would probably be the major ones that I could think of. And maybe if Jackson Irvine did get injured when he limped off against Reading, maybe there might have to be some thought about changing that round as well.
Do you have a score prediction for this one?
This is potentially the hardest score prediction to have ever made, given the frailties on both sides. But I do have that promising feeling that I don't think it's going to be dire straits for Cities. I think it'll be a low-scoring game. I think we're going to I think we'll win 1-0.
Yeah, I think I'll go with you on that one as well. I think you kind of just get the feeling that we've been grinding out draws and grinding out results the last couple of weeks, and it'll turn in our favour in this game, and we'll be able to edge across the line with a 1-0 win. But yeah, as you say, it could go either way. It's a pretty huge game with a lot riding on it. So I know in the past our players tend to sort of go into their shells a little bit when there's a lot on the line, and I guess we just have to cross our fingers that they can really stand up and be counted for in this game. And sort of in a mirror of the game 12 months ago, it really has that much riding on it that if we can get the 3 points and sort of start to edge up the table, then our position in the championship would be a lot more secure for next season.
That's exactly right. I guess the reality check is we are still only in January, and it's very tight at the bottom and a long way to go. So if we did lose this game, it wouldn't spell the end of end of the world for City. But if we were to pick up 3 points and skyrocket out of that bottom kind of 4 or 5 spots, that would be incredibly promising as far as signs under Atkins that we are heading in the right direction.
Absolutely. Well, hopefully we can pick up the 3 points on the weekend. And thank you for joining me tonight, Logan.
Not a problem, Alex. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for listening in, and hopefully we're back here in a week's time talking about a big win against Sunderland. So until then, come on, City. You've been listening to the official Hull City Australia podcast. For more discussion, join us on Facebook in the Hull City AFC Australian Supporters Group, or follow us on Twitter at Hull City AFC Oz. The music was created by Amber and Black.
There's no turning back 'cause you're out.